Hey guys, Vecchio here. In this video, I'm going to go over this shot and how I achieve this look. So let's jump right in. Let's start with the key light. If you remember the previous video, the key light was two bank 2-foot flow lights. And again, if you don't know what those lights are, they're basically 2-foot Kinos, just a different brand. And I'll put a link to the lights in the description. So it was the same key for this shot. We just turned it around for this shot on mic. We also had a 500 watt tungsten, and on that 500 watt tungsten we had half CTB, and that was way off in the distance here, probably 15 feet away, maybe 10 feet away. And that's what's giving the edge light, which is nice because it's a cooler light as opposed to what's going on in his face and what's spilling in the background here. But this side of his face here falls into shadow. And you can see a little bit of a triangle here, which isn't always necessary, but it's a pretty nice style and a pretty nice effect. If I clear that, you can see that the nose shadow creates this triangle here with the cheekbone. And so we have this brighter spot. So a 500 watt tungsten through half CTB, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this light later because there was an issue that I ran into. And then in the background here, there was a house light on. This stairway led down to a hallway, and so there was a light down here in the hallway, and that's what's illuminating this area over here. I should also note that this practical was on when we shot this. Not that you would really get too much spill from that because the distance is kind of far, but maybe there was a little bit of extra fill on his face, which was fine. We liked the way it looked. We turned it on and off, and from what I can remember, there really wasn't that much of a difference. So we just kept it on because we liked the way it looked. And then finally, if I just full screen this, I should note that you can see a better shot of the room here. And this mirror with these columns of lights, it's basically like a makeup or beauty mirror. This was on the whole time. And then we also had this light down here on the bottom right side of the screen. If I move this out of the way, you can see that in the corner there, just to kind of bring up the exposure in that area, and it looks kind of cool. I'm a big fan of putting practicals in a scene. Having this light and then this light in the background added a more interesting texture. What a light would be doing on the floor here in real life, I have no idea, but it looks good. So, and anyway, Mike's character is kind of sketchy and just kind of a weird guy, so it kind of works with his character. That's just me trying to rationalize it. I just think it looks cool. Now, I should also note that these two bank 2-foot flow lights were 3200 Kelvin, and this 500 watt tungsten obviously is tungsten, but I cooled it off with half CTB. This house light is kind of cool in color temperature, so it actually adds a nice texture to the background where it's a little bit cooler. It's not blue, but it's just a little bit more balanced and cooler than the light that's shining onto Mike's face. Now, again, we had the 4x of light grid, and that adds a bit of yellow. And then when you have lights like these where they're beauty lights, their wattage is probably not that powerful, and those usually run around 2800 Kelvin, roughly. It's a little bit warmer than what the camera was balanced to, and the camera was actually balanced to 3800 Kelvin, as you remember from the last breakdown. If I just look at the metadata here, and I bring it over to the camera settings, you can see here that the white balance is 3800 Kelvin, tint is at 10, and then all the obvious things like frame rate and shutter and all that. ISO 800, and also just to note, again, this was shot on Leica R Summicron lenses, and Mike's side here was shot on the 35mm, as was David's side. So let's jump right into color correction. This one is actually going to be pretty simple. So I'm just going to apply my starting point, again, just to break this down real quick. This is just a color space transform from Rec 709 linear to Arri Alexa Arilog C, just so I can use the Arri Alexa LUT and my little curve adjustment here to bring up the shadows, which is just the starting place. It's a place I like to start. You'll notice here, again, we ran into this problem last time with Dave's side, where the footage doesn't look right. And that's because we shot ProRes, so this is not RAW, so we're not able to use Rec 709 linear. We just have to change the settings here. So the input color space would be Blackmagic Design 4.6K film V3, which is what we shot, and also Blackmagic Design 4.6K film. And again, you could then convert this to Rec 709 and then linear if you wanted to, and then drop on the color space transform from Rec 709 linear to Arri Alexa Arilog C, but in this case, I'm just going to simplify it and go directly from Blackmagic straight to the Arri Alexa color space and the Arilog C output gamma. Again, this node is for relighting if we need it. This is my curve adjustment where I like to set my lift gamma gain settings. So I'm just going to drop the shadows down to 0 and just watch the scope in the lower right. So around there, I'm just going to take a look at this full screen. I think this is actually pretty good. I'm liking where everything's falling. I just feel the midtones, there's just too much light back here. There's just too much spill, and I want that to fall into more shadow. So I'm just going to drop the midtones a little bit. There we go. And maybe a little bit more, and I'm just going to make sure that I'm not clipping the shadows, so I'm just going to lift the blacks just up a hair. And that's looking better to me. I like that that's falling more into shadow and that you could barely see back there. I'm probably going to drop it down just a little bit. The midtones, I'm going to drop the midtones down just a little bit more because I'm going to push the gain up just slightly. And that's looking pretty good. I like the way that looks. It's not too contrasty. It still has a soft contrast look. Now again, if I were to add post contrast to this, you can really tell because the blacks are just really deep. That's not the look I was really going for when I'm doing this, so I'm just going to reset that. So after this curve setting and the lift gamma gain setting, I have this node here, which is a color boost. As a default, I think that some of the tones don't come through in this color space. So if I boost the color a little bit, then it matches it closer to where the Alexa is at. So I just bring the color boost here up to 5. This node, I'm just going to adjust my saturation. Now, if I look at the image, just looking at it, I could see that the skin tones and everything, just overall, everything is just too saturated. It's not the look I'm going for. So I'm just going to drop it down. And from experience, I know that I can drop this down to 42, and that'll give me the look I want. But good rule of thumb is if you're just adjusting this, you can bring it down, and then if you feel like you're too far, then bring it back up, and then go a little bit too far so that you can know that you went too far, then bring it down, back up, and just rock back and forth until you kind of narrow in on the exact setting that you want. And that's roughly where I end up, about 42. So I'm looking at it, I'm just going to pull it down just a little bit more because I don't want the skin tone to be glowing like that. I'm just doing a before and after, or disabling this. I want the skin tones to have a little bit more of a muted, more natural kind of look to them. And so that's before saturation, and that's after. And I like the way that's looking. Now again, this last node is film convert, and it's 35mm Academy, grain at 50%. Sometimes I'll bump it up to about 61, but I think in this instance I can keep it at 50. I just want to make sure too that I match the same amount of grain between shots here. I want to make sure that the grain is consistent between the two shots because they're supposed to be lit pretty evenly with each other, that is. Now one of the things I wanted to talk about with that 500 watt tungsten through half CTB is that it looks good here. So as I go through here and I play this, you can kind of see that there's this weird shadow right by his ear. And that's me, I kind of messed that up. I had the light too low, so that's something you want to look out for. You don't want to keep the light too low. If I had to do this again, I would probably elevate the light a lot higher so it's coming in at more of an angle. Coming from below or straight on, his hood here probably would have gotten in the way. It's probably just too low. You could see that angle, the light's hitting his ear and then it's causing a shadow on his head. So what I should have done was elevate this light higher, or in fact bring it around more toward the back side of him if that's possible. I do like the way though that it's filling in this side of the face here, and then you can see here that there's this line here. And so what I should have done was bring it up higher and made sure that there was no shadow being cast on his face or on his head. So just a couple things to look out for. Make sure that if you have a hard edge light here, that you're not doing anything to cause any kind of shadow. I could have even probably brought the light closer and added some diffusion so that if it was casting a shadow, it would be less noticeable than that, because that's a pretty hard shadow. Just something to look out for when you have an edge light. Now some people might say, hey, why are you highlighting that screw up? And it's because I want you guys to know that if you ever do a similar setup, that you watch out for things like that, like shadows that are distracting and are not creatively what you're going for. I'm also going to say that one other thing that I don't like about this shot is that there's not a glint in his eyes. Now if he moves around, you may be able to find one like right there. You can see right there that there's a tiny glint in his eyes. And I think what the problem was here is just that I had the 4x up too high because I liked the angle of the nose shadow. Looking back, I could have probably brought it down lower and it probably would have just moved the shadow over a little bit more this way instead of going straight down. And then I would have had a catch in his eye. Another thing I could have done was just brought a small light a little bit lower, even if it's just a white card or something like that, just to give him a little bit more of a catch in his eye, so that if his head isn't up and back like it is there, you would still get a catch in the eye. But the thing to look out for if you do bring another light in is that you're going to have two catches or two glints in his eyes. If he's in this position, you'd see a glint up here, and then you see another glint probably down there. So just something to look out for if that's not what you want. If you find that's going to be too distracting, then you want to adjust your key to make sure that that glint is appearing in his eyes and that your key light isn't too high. Alright guys, thanks for watching. This is Paul Vecchio. If you like this video, please share it, please subscribe, or like the Facebook page. I hope this helped. Hit me up if you have any questions or if you have any requests. You could email me at paul@pauldv.net or catch me on any of the social networks, which will be linked to in the description. Thanks guys. Paul Vecchio. I'll talk to you next time.